Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host, Devontae Colonel. Welcome to another episode of the Inspired Challenge podcast. Today, we are jumping into a conversation, a humble conversation, if you will, a conversation about diligence, about putting the time, the work, and the effort in. And I thought that the man to join me for that today is someone that I've known at this point for a couple of years. Yeah. Not a consistent couple of years, mind you, but we have known each other through dancing, through anime, through a shared love of these things. And he's just been steadily working away, grinding away at it. So at this time, please give it up, folks, for my man, Auree. Oh, that's the wrong one. So, Auree, thank you for, first of all, I can't say it enough. Thank you for taking the time out. Busy as all crazy from the job that you do and working the role that you have and how you've made yourself so indisposable to it that while so many people have been getting either laid off or their time has come up and it's not been renewed, whatever it's been, you've been chosen as a select few that has maintained your position and rank in it. Really just goes to speak to the proficiency of work that you've done and the value that you've brought to your service work. And I didn't name it because I wasn't sure how you felt about it, but feel free to speak as liberally as you want about it. Excuse me. Oh, man. But if you could, please give the folks your name, what you do for work, hobbies, age, and relationship status.
All right. So my name is Auree Postel. I'm age 32. Currently, my relationship status is single, waiting for the right person. And I'd say currently my line of work is I'm currently with the Walt Disney Company on the media side as a data analyst under the data engineering branch. So kind of all that when people ask me what do I do, in short, I let people know, is the show doing good or not? You know, where are the many places it can be at and how well is it doing?
Man. And so, like we said, ILC, Walt Disney, that is the doggone biggest giant in all of America right now. Maybe next to like Amazon and what is it? Amazon and X right now.
Yep.
And so to be able to have a man of your caliber here with us is truly an honor. But just more so that you were willing to get up. You guys, this show, if y'all are watching on the playback, this show is occurring at 8 in the morning, maybe about 8:20. The man took off time from work. He's using some PTO in there. He is pushed back some meetings and pushing back meetings with a multi-billion-dollar company to come onto a podcast. You know, all that to say, truly appreciate it, my man.
It's great to be here. So
great to have you. So I want to go ahead and allow for you to immediately get into your story. Please tell us about the origin story of Auree Postel and how you developed, what your growing up environment, home life, circumstances were, major influences that you had, and things that were pivotal moments that shaped you into the man that you are today.
Stuff. So for me, I guess it all started. So my hometown is Port Orange, Florida, which is probably like 10 minutes away from Daytona Beach. I was born to Stacy Postel, my lovely mother. And this was like, this point way back when. Growing up, I kind of had kind of a family unit where it was kind of like single mother, but then like, her parents involved too. So like I've never met my biological father. But, I've had lovely enough to have my grandpa step in. My grandma kind of provided that kind of nuclear family unit. So in the house, it was my grandparents and then my mom and then her two siblings and then me. And then eventually a couple years later, my sister would come along, but that was kind of our core family unit growing up. And growing up, honestly, like I had a really good childhood. Like it's one of those things where like, it was definitely humble beginnings, like to an extent, like, I didn't, it's one of those things where like, there was never a day I went hungry. There was never a day I had to worry about like, kind of those kind of things. But there were kind of things where like, looking around, like, it's hard to be like, oh, I'm not taking a vacation that often. I'm not going this place, or there's a lot of experience I didn't necessarily have. And like, I know growing up, there were just certain little things where like, oh, I can't really do that because of like money, that kind of a thing, So like, I think that kind of fueled me growing up and seeing how hard my mom worked. Cause like my mom, love her to death. Like she put her life on hold because like, she had me very, very young, but she put her life on hold. She was like, okay, I'm going to dedicate my time to my kids. So like, she like put off dating, relationships. She put off, necessarily pursuing her dreams. And she was just like, hey, I'm going to make sure you're taken care of. So like, that's kind of like the core crux of me kind of getting my inspiration to like work hard, because I've seen her work hard every day just to make sure that like I could have. And then kind of like on my career path growing up, kind of a typical thing. Like I was good at math. Thank my mom, she blessed me with some, smart genes, that kind of a thing. So like, and then like my grandpa always noticed that, I started very early with like the Lego building and that kind of a thing. So everyone's like, hell, you could be like an architect. You can like, maybe go the engineering route, that kind of a thing. So like, working through school, especially like, elementary school, middle school. Also too, like, since I kind of grew up in a, predominantly like white area, like a lot of times there was plenty of times where I was like the only black male in the room, plenty of times. And like, I didn't really realize it until like, maybe like more middle school, high school. And then kind of when that happened, it's kind of like, I think there was always a cloud of just expectation that, I kind of held myself to, just not knowing it. Cause it's kind of like, you kind of notice people are always kind of like, when you're different, they're always going to watch and see what you do. They're always going to like, kind of like unknowingly be like, oh, is he this type of person or that type of person, So like, I always made sure like, I was gunning for that number one spot. I always wanted to be the smartest in the class. I'm like, it's one of those things where like, my mom didn't put me on this earth to like, be mediocre. So like from then I was always like grinding on to make sure I was like, if I'm going to be here, like the goal was always the standard. I think too, like one thing was important is that my parents definitely like held me to a certain standard. Like I remember distinctly, like, when my friends would get A's, they get like $50 per A. And I'm just like, I'm fighting for like $1 an A, that kind of a thing, like the standards were always high, or just like, I think for the most part, I was able to like grind through and get A's until like, I think maybe like late high school, that kind of a thing. But kind of going from there, like I said, middle school was fine. High school, I think at that point I kind of started to really like shape life. And then in high school I did the IB program, which basically is like an international program. So like, it involves all around the world. So like the tests I'm taking with, people from China, people from England, that kind of a thing. So it's like an international program and like very prestigious, and there's not too many of those schools. But that was kind of just another thing too, where like I've always been like driven by just like, the people around me. Cause like my mom's siblings, my aunt and uncle, the high school I went to, like their pictures were literally in the atrium. Like my aunt was Hawk of the Year. So like every time I walked through that atrium, I'd see her picture up. So like my motivation was always like, I want to be on that level. I want to like get my picture up there, that kind of a thing, So it's kind of like a back and forth of just like, making sure that, I'm kind of representing my family well. Cause like everyone in the family definitely kind of has that trait of working hard. And if everyone wants to kind of like, make sure like I basically like represented them well.
So really quick, I've got some super interested pieces here, man. So this, so your mom was, I mean, wow, you mentioned she was a hard worker, really smart and all that, but she was really on that level. And so, yeah, I guess when you mentioned that she put XYZ on the back burner, this comes not even just like how most people are like, oh yeah, they put aside their dreams. This is like really like she had all the tools and she legitimately, it was like, all right, it's not just like colloquially speaking, putting the dreams on the back. It's like actually this person had the potential and chose to prioritize you over all of that other stuff right there. So, and then being a young black man in, I mean, you're 32, I'm 30, so 93. And I can remember dynamics in the 90s.
Yep.
They weren't like crazy wild, but it was the 90s. So like, I can only imagine in that echelon of like education, how like you mentioned, you were constantly on your P's and Q's, kind of watching and like being like, all right, I really need to show out here. I'm curious in terms of how did you navigate avoiding distractions and staying on focus and not letting anything, whether it was racial dynamics or interest of the opposite sex, like how did you navigate these elements in there?
Early on in life, it definitely was. I was almost kind of blind to it in a way, growing up. Just because, like, I think it's weird. Like, when you're the only one in the room that looks like you don't necessarily always see you. So you're just like, So I think that helps in a way where, like, I was purely comparing myself based on, like, was I just as smart as them? Yes. Did I, could I run as fast as them? Yes. Like that kind of a thing. So that kind of helped. And then when I became aware of those kind of like dynamics and things, I just had to be like smart to it. Cause like, especially like around the 90s or 2000s, like, things, were definitely like changing to be more progressive, but it definitely was still more like you had your stereotypes, like, I was like, one of those things where like, I didn't necessarily want to be put in the ghetto box necessarily. Like I still wanted to maintain my culture. I still wanted to like represent it, but I didn't want to necessarily be put in that like kind of like ghetto, not going to be meant for anything in life, that kind of bucket. And then I think, a lot of my drivers, especially like, I think my mom definitely was a driver. Cause like, I was like, I need to, ultimately, like I didn't want her sacrifice to be in vain. So like my ultimate goal, like I have like 3 like major like life goals I live by. And like my first one was like take care of my mom and little sister. Just get in a position where like, financially, emotionally, just time wise, I'm able to do that with them. And then my other ones is be a good husband and then be a good father. So like the other 2 I'm working on, we're working on those 2 right now. But like, I think those are like, I kind of set kind of that standard for myself. And I think all that kind of flows. I think one of those kind of things, just like, it's about, service and putting the time in and like sacrificing. So kind of like, I feel like if I can match the level of the people around me, because I've had family sacrifice me, I had friends sacrifice. So like the core group around me, if I can like maintain the level like they've given to me, just what I give to others, I feel like, that will lead to success. And in terms of just like not being as distracted by things, I think, like I said, I was just like competitive. Like that was the biggest thing. I'm just like, I can't slip up. Like if I'm over here doing this thing, I'm not putting my focus to my studies, not putting my focus into my friends and that kind of a thing. And like down the line, like, like I think I've always been on in terms of academics, but then I think as time went on, I had to apply that same drive to like my friendships, my relationships, and that kind of a thing too. Cause like early on, especially I found that when we talk about especially like friendships and relationships, like everything is by proximity. Like these are the people you grew up with, that kind of a thing. But once I kind of like went to college and started like living life and being more out in the world, it's definitely way more important to like be mindful of the spaces you're in, the people you choose to hang around with, because, it's kind of that old adage of like, I can tell you who you are by the people you hang around with, so.
Man, so you were in, as you said, that top kind of echelon of international program. And could you name that again?
Yeah, the International Baccalaureate Program. So IB program for short.
Man, IB is no joke. Yeah. Holy smokes. So shout outs to you getting on that level. And feel free to continue. I just wanted to ask some questions in that.
Yeah. So that was basically the high school program. So kind of once that was done, because I think some people are probably more familiar with like maybe like the AP program. So it's very similar to that, except for the IB program. Like I think for AP, you can basically choose that, I'm good at math, so let me pursue AP math, or I'm good at these subjects. I think the IB program forced you to they called it the HEX. So you had to be good at 6 subjects. Like there was no way around it. So like they basically wanted you to be a well-rounded individual. So you took tests for all the subject matter, and then kind of how you got your like IB diploma on top of your high school diploma is that you scored well enough in each of the categories to like collectively you had a certain score. So I was able to do that, get my IB diploma, which was good because like that was like the one thing I think too, like kind of with my family, like everyone's smart in my family. So like, but that was like the one, I'm like the first in my family to be able to do that accomplishment is to get an IB diploma. So like, so that's one thing, because I think kind of to go back to the story of like looking up and seeing my, I guess, my aunt and uncle's names in there, I'd actually get my name there. Like I wasn't in the Hall of Fame. I didn't get selected for that. And I think at the time it definitely like ate at me. But I remember having a conversation with mom being like, hey, I'm proud of you and I'm proud of what you've done. And I'm like, that's all I need. Cause like I haven't been to high school since like even if my picture was up there, it's not like I'm looking at it every day. So that's kind of a good lesson of just like, it's weird, like how much that was driving me and then how much little it matters now, Wow. But like, just the notions and lessons I took from it, just the notions of like, if you want to get something, you have to put the work in for it. I think I'm thankful for at least like that part of it. Like, so even now I have to like be careful of like, okay, what is my motivation? Because if it's something that's kind of as, trivial as that, or something that's going to just be like blown away on the side, then like, what happens when that leaves, so you don't want to anchor your motivations on things that are temporary. So
yeah, 100%. When you were, doggone, I should have wrote this question down. There was a question that I had involving, no, it wasn't a question. It was a statement. So, in terms of where you sit right now with your ability to, as you mentioned, like take care of your mom and then eventually take care of a wife and then take care of your children. It seems right now, and feel free to correct if wrong, that you sit in a position where it's very unique in that you actually probably have the capacity to be able to take care of her in a decent manner, more so than most guys our age right now are able to do. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I'm definitely like my career path and where I'm in life. I'm definitely feel blessed in that manner. Like I feel like in terms of where I am in life compared to like, where I thought I would be, I'm like, oh, we're doing pretty well. Like, we got a job that pays decently. Like I feel like, even then, I think more importantly, it's just the skill set I've built. So like, people all the time, because, the world's changing, the economy's changing, like, no job is 100% safe. But then I tell people, because one thing kind of on my path, because right now I'm definitely more in the data tech programming coding field, but my true calling is teaching. Like ultimately that's what I want to do. And like, should have known that because, fun fact about my mom, she's been teaching for 22 years now, like elementary school teacher. So like, no, shouldn't surprise anyone that like that's happens to be my calling too. Like, but I think one of my drivers who en route to like basically be able to take care of people, be, financially okay and everything. I kind of chose my current route of, using my skill set to like basically get in a position where like, okay, cool. Like I have a skill set that's basically untouchable. So like I can lose my job today, but my skill set will travel, So like, I always say that, okay, God's blessed me with this job. And then if I lose this job, he'll bless me with another one. So for that, my skill set will travel. So that I think that's something important that I always tell people of like, how do you get to where I currently am? It's just like, build your skill set. Like make sure you have certain criteria and certain things you can do that other people can't necessarily do.
So I guess a question that would come in there would then be, how does one in your purview, how does one discern their skill set, come to actually learn about it, and then maybe aside from just what people say, oh, you're kind of good at this or you're pretty good at that, but really being able to hone in on their thing. What was your process of that, and how did you grow that and develop that and figure out what was good to supplement in order to become more proficient in that, to be able to get you a position where you're at now?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, because the thing is too, like with my path, like it's very much changed. Like I went to school for industrial engineering. I went to UCF. So I went to school for industrial engineering, got my bachelor's and master's in it, but like I'm not doing industrial engineering currently.
Yeah.
But like, with that, there's like the background of like the math and the statistics and then like the people aspect. And like I've kind of like taken bits and pieces from that and like spun it into like my new kind of career, which is more of the programming, coding, kind of more in the data analytics field. So like I think with that, especially like when you're trying to look at a career, I think because I used to, one of the biggest things that kind of like, I didn't really know I wanted to really be a teacher until probably like my 4th year of college. And that was kind of just one of those things where like I got a job as like a teaching assistant. And with that job, it let me know like, oh, like I really like talking to students. I really like kind of like the mentoring, but also like imparting knowledge so they can like, be successful in the future. Like I get so proud when like one of my old students hit me up being like, yeah, I started like a business selling shoestrings and it's grossing like it's grossing like $250,000. I'm just like, I remember just trying to teach you how to like do this basic Excel thing. Like,
that's amazing. Yeah.
So like all the time on LinkedIn, I just kind of follow, all the like success of my students and stuff. And I'm like, I feel like it's kind of cool living kind of through that. Cause like, I feel like I definitely always more of a background person. Like I don't necessarily need to have the biggest job, the highest profile thing. Disney's just fun, like there's like, it's one of those things where like, it's just a fun company. Cause I think if I was more in the real nitty gritty, like day to day, like I'm dealing with like machining parts and that kind of thing. Like that's not necessarily for me, that's for certain people, but it's not necessarily for me. I'm definitely more of the people aspect, the kind of creating experiences thing.
Right.
So, but in terms of like, yeah, creating a skill set, I think there's two important things to consider. Is one, like, if you like it, you know, and then two, like, you know, are you willing to put in the work for it? Because like for me to find a skill and to be at kind of this level, it's important to like, you just gotta know it's not going to be easy. Like, you know, you know, people, you know, all the time, like, you know, engineering is no joke. Like I had to put my 5 years into my bachelor's and then another couple of years into my master's. And like, it was not easy. Like, I don't sugarcoat, especially when I was like mentoring my freshman students. I'm like, they're like, oh, is engineering hard? I'm like, yes. Yes, it is hard. But like, you know, it's kind of like one of the best quotes my grandpa gave me is like, you know, to much is given, much is expected, you know? And if like you want, you know, to be at a high level, if you want to be valuable, you have to create value. And often value comes from scarcity. Value comes from like having a rarity thing that people aren't willing to do, you know?
Yeah.
So, and then, but with that though, like I also tell my engineering students, like, you know, don't just do it for the money. Don't just do it because you can. Cause like, that was my thing where like, I think I started like civil engineering and then I realized very quickly that that's just not for me, you know, and that's switched to industrial, but I'm like glad I like got that path. And like, I tell them all the time, like, it's better to like, you know, change your path and do something different than just like plow through life, get your degree and then be miserable. Cause like ultimately, especially when you think of like your line of work and your job, like you spend most of your time doing that. You'll spend more time with that than you do sleeping sometimes, than you do with your spouse sometimes. Like it will take up a good chunk of your life. So you want to make sure that you at least at some level enjoy it. Otherwise you're just going to burn out. And then like, you know, probably a piece of your life is just going to be kind of struggling. So.
In that you went in for industrial engineering, kind of had a slight detour towards civil engineering at a certain point.
Yeah.
How does one know like their next steps? And so for example, I have a brother. He recently graduated with a liberal arts degree and he plans on getting he's going to do a sub in business and whatnot. So how would someone literally in that circumstance right now, the class of 2025,
Yeah.
what would you give them in terms of like 3 super practical steps as far as like, hey, if you just got your basic degree in this, maybe you want to get an extra like 6 months as a sub in something, like here's like the top things that I would give you as like the next steps to do to be the most competitive in your in industry and to also find your like sub niche of where you could fit in.
Yeah. I'd say one underrated thing is like your communication, like how you relay information. Cause especially in my field, when you have, you know, the smartest minds, the best engineers, the best data analysts, like it doesn't mean anything if you can't communicate what the data is saying or what the point is of things. Cause you're going to have executives in the room and all they want to know is like, you know, what information do I need to make a critical decision for the company, that kind of a thing. And if like, it doesn't matter if you know all the knowledge, if you can't communicate it. So that's definitely something to work on, whether it's like, you know, reading a lot of different materials, getting your vocabulary up, just getting good at just having conversation and getting good at like, how can I take this complex thing that I do and just whittle it down to where I can explain it to a 5-year-old? So like communication is definitely like a really important, like kind of underrated thing.
Let's play that for a second. So let's imagine that I'm like your high powered, like superintendent and whatnot. And you've got a report, like what would like, go through how you would present something basic.
I think usually when I present, the first thing is always like, you know, what is the goal / question? So like, what is the point of this off rep? What is the point of this, presentation or thing I'm trying to convey? You know, here's the high level question. And then I think it's important to just chunk it into different pieces. So, you know, if the thing is, okay, should we renew this show or not? That's like the high arching question. So we break that down to like, okay, how is it performing? How is it performing compared to other shows? And where do we think it will go? So kind of like a past, present, future kind of look, that kind of thing. So like you just kind of break it down to like small chunks. And then from there, you know, ideally, especially in my line of work, which I kind of enjoy because like, I don't necessarily like making those big time calls sometimes. So my job is like, hey, here, based on everything I know, this is what the numbers are saying. This is all we know. We just present it in a certain way where ultimately someone's got to make a decision. But we try to make it to where they have as much information as they can to be able to make that decision. But if you don't communicate it clearly, then they're just going to be as confused. And especially like usually when you get high up as executives, they're really good at asking questions. So they'll look at your stuff and be like, what is this one thing here? That doesn't make sense. And like, that'll be the one thing you didn't double check, that kind of a thing. So like, it's very important to be very thorough in your work too. Like you have to know it. basically to the level where you can teach it. Like if you can't teach it, if you can't explain it to like someone that has nothing to do with the industry you're in, then it's probably not to the level you want to have it to where you're presenting it to like, even, your higher ups that do know about the material. So you kind of want to get it that precise and that, you want to know that much about it to where you can explain it in that fashion.
Okay. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense there. You need to be able to perform at that high function to where they would be able to have like a holistic picture of it just as much as what you're understanding in it. And if they don't have it right there, at least from the notes that you give them, they're able to say, okay, well, maybe we missed this certain thing. They can go back, review it, and have that holistic picture. Yeah. Okay. And that goes, into that communication aspect there. And is the communication part something that is innate to you, or is this something that you developed as a skill set from your time in it, in your degree and that process through it?
Definitely a bit of both, but I would definitely favor a little bit more of the development, because just like anything, the more you do it, the better you get at it. So I've done plenty of presentations over my life, and they've been good ones, they've been bad ones. Like I said, like when I say executives will pick you apart, like it's happened from experience. It's happened to me where like I've been in a meeting and like you'll get that question just like, oh, that's the one thing I didn't cover, but like that makes you better in terms of your preparation, because like it's kind of like the all the sports adages, like perfect practice makes perfect performance, that kind of a thing. So like the better prepped you are, especially like for those kind of things. Because honestly, like a lot of, especially like when I interned at Disney, because I interned before I actually worked there, a lot of our things were just like, the goal was like to basically pick out what are they going to ask me? What questions am I expecting? That way, when they ask them, I'm ready with it,
Makes sense.
So I think that's definitely a part of it, but you definitely develop it the more you do it. And then honestly, one thing too is like just taking good feedback and then taking that criticism. Cause like I said, I've had plenty of bad, presentations before, but like, one of those things, like one thing for me is I always try to like not make the same mistakes twice. So like, if it was something where like, oh, I had inconsistent fonts, or, oh, I rambled for like 20 minutes on this thing that didn't matter. Like, I try to be cognizant of that and just kind of in my prep being like, okay, like I said, getting back to my key points, what are my, what are the things I need to hammer? What are the important things I need to do? And how can I convey them in a concise and like, manner? Because honestly, the less words I say, the less I can get prodded and poked at. So, so like that's also an advantage of just being very concise and clear with your communication.
That makes all the sense right there. The more that you open yourself up to it, the more that you will get it. Absolutely.
Yeah, if we basically say don't add confusion to the pot. Basically, that's kind of how we phrase it. So,
oh man, and then forgive me if you've already explained this, but please iterate for me again how a person like immediate next steps that a person can take towards like truly cultivating these pieces.
Yeah. To get around, because like I could always be like, oh yeah, go learn coding, go to like more technical aspect, but like I think I really want to bring forth like just the soft skills that people don't think about. And like one thing too is like ultimately valuing yourself. That's a big one. Like valuing yourself and kind of having that innate confidence, because especially in my line of work, like you have to be confident. Like you have to basically believe that, okay, I've double checked this. I know I do good work, and like, cause like it's so easy to have, we call like analysis paralysis, where like you can just, comb over the same set of data for hours trying to pull out this nugget, or like, kind of second guessing yourself on if this is right or wrong. And you lose a lot of time and lose a lot of health in that regard too. So my biggest thing is like, you kind of have to know that I put in the work, or at least I'm willing to put in the work. And like, everything I've learned, everything I've been through, like all this cultivates to like the current version I am. And I know that's a good person. And I know that's a valuable person. Cause especially like, like I said, you can be super talented. You can be the smartest in the room, but like, if you don't project yourself confidently, you lose that credibility with your audience, especially if you're presenting. And also too, like if you have certain doubts, people can I feel like people can almost sense that too. Like if you're not confident in what you're conveying or speaking, whether it's right or wrong. Cause like there's an art, I find like the more I'm into like data and stuff, the more I'm like, oh, there's still an art form to it. Cause it's not just raw numbers. Like I can literally have the best numbers that paint the clearest story that I think in my mind. But if it's not conveyed a certain way, then it doesn't matter, So it's like kind of just as much as the communication part is like kind of like the, knowing that, okay, I have confidence that this is right. And then like, also living with that too. Cause like mistakes are going to happen. You're not going to be perfect. And like, I personally put a lot of pressure on myself. Like, a lot of people do. But like with that, I think that you need like a certain level of grace with yourself also. Like it's okay to have that pressure to kind of push you, but also you need to kind of have that soft pillow to fall on when like things go bad, being like, hey, made a mistake, but I'm still valuable. I still put the work in. I still know a lot. And like, best believe if I ever get another shot at it, whatever just happened, I'm going to kill it. That kind of a thing, So I think that's another thing people just like, and that comes with time too, especially confidence. Like whether it's like, on a date, whether it's like, presenting to like a room of 1,000 people, like that's something where like once you build that innately in yourself, it'll manifest in plenty of other places in your life. So that's something you really want to develop, especially like after, because like especially too like when you're going through school, it's very rote of like, all right, go to the class, learn this, do this, take this test, kind of thing. You don't necessarily get necessarily challenged in that aspect. It's more so like how good was I at conveying this thing that I was taught, which is necessary, but I feel like traditional schooling and traditional things, like they don't necessarily teach those things. So that's something you kind of have to go out and do on your own to an extent.
So, okay, we've got the three soft skills you mentioned here were communication of data at a high level, being able to take pieces, break it down, ask the high level questions, break it down into chunks, and then being able to explain it as if to a 5-year-old with that level of clarity. We've got valuing yourself, and in that being able to project basically a competence that you have about something and an assuredness that you have competence in that thing. And then we have the grace with yourself that even if you have these things in place, if something is out of place, that you're not riding yourself on this couple of things that maybe weren't totally set. You instead take it as like an opportunity for growth. And those are like the 3 soft skills that you would say are your biggest contributing factors.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
And then a bonus one I can throw in is
let's go.
Yeah, at least in my at least in my field, like one of the biggest things is I remember when I first got my internship at Disney, like when I was in that final interview, I asked what would be my boss's boss at the time. I was like, what do you look for in an intern? And like his thing was like analytical curiosity. And basically I can extend that to in general, like, never stop learning, like be curious about the world. Don't just think that, because I got my degree in this is what I do for the rest of my life. It's like, no, you should never stop learning. You should never stop pursuing. If something interests you, keep pursuing it, learn it. And like, there's so many ways, especially nowadays, we have all this, like the luxury of technology where like, there's so many things you can learn and not have to drop a dime on a class, So like, I encourage people to definitely like, learn certain skill sets. Like for me, like fun fact, like coding, I took one coding class my entire, 7-year UCF career, but now I code every single day, basically.
Wow.
And basically I had to learn coding during my internship. I basically just taught myself, like learned it on the fly, like watched a lot of YouTube videos, Googled a lot of things, that kind of a thing. So
do you have any channels that you would recommend?
So I primarily deal with SQL. So like, I think there's like a SQL 123, a SQL Zoo, YouTube definitely, like, you literally just do like SQL intro course and like, there's so much good materials. And yeah, like there's so much, like I said, there's a lot of free materials too.
Yeah.
And then especially like, I know like if someone's definitely interested in like the data analytics field, particularly like I know Google has like a free certification you can do. So there's a lot of avenues, like Google is your friend, like, search for things, seek for things. And like, that's another thing too. Cause like, another thing too, I guess is like, one thing important for me is especially like a situation where like someone's just graduated. I would say honestly, like I said, don't put yourself in the box. Don't think like just because you got your degree in this is what you have to do. One of my professors in college that I admire super well is that he basically has had like 4 different careers, basically. Like his life has just been on the fly. Like I think he started in robotics and then he was like, you know what I want to do? I want to do NASCAR. So he did what he had to do, learned what he had to do, and then was working NASCAR for a bit. And he was like, you know what? I want to be a professor. Went to school, got his industrial engineering. Now he was teaching me. And he was like, you know what I want to do? I want to learn how to draw. He actually sat in a 2D art class at UCF.
Oh, wow.
Started there. Now he's assistant professor in the art department.
Look at that.
So like, that's one thing too. Like he kind of inspires me to where like, whatever you think you are in life, like your path can change and that's okay. Like, just because you got this skill set just because like, you know, this is what you know doesn't mean you can't learn a new skill set, doesn't mean you can't pursue a new passion. Especially now, like it's tough right now, especially when you're graduating, because like the world is pushing you certain ways. You have to go make money now, do this thing, that kind of a thing. But, you know, I feel like, especially like one thing I always get to my students is like, you know, there are other paths to success. And like most people, you know, they never really end where they start. Like it's very rare these days. And like, you know, that's for a reason. Cause like you change as a person, especially in those pivotal years going through college, like you change, physically and mentally change as a person, your interests change too. So like, it could be just a random day where you suddenly find that, oh, I really like acting. I really like art. I really like this. And like, I would advise people like, you know, you do need a baseline so like you can like get a job and like make money and stuff. But like, you know, definitely never be afraid to like on the side, do what you can to like pursue, whether it's like entrepreneurship, whether it's like side gigs, side acting, side selling things, this kind of thing, like whatever you want to do, like, you know, once you kind of establish your base, like never be afraid to like pursue something different. Or sometimes you have to take a leap of faith. Like if you're not happy where you are, especially like that's the biggest thing. Like if you're not happy where you are, it is never too late to go back to school and figure things out. Like it is never too late. Education will always be there. Other things will always be there. Like as long as you're like figuring out a way to pay bills, like, you know, keep pursuing different types of education if like you wanted to. So
nice, my man. All right. And I know all of this came as like a stop that I gave in order to do this as you were going through and explaining kind of your collegiate path in your kind of formation story. So now to kind of go back on that trail, if you can pull the thread, feel free to continue from there.
Okay, yeah. So college experience. I did industrial engineering. Well, I started civil engineering. Definitely figured out that was not my path. You know, that very prideful, competitive kid, you know, who's a little stubborn, you know, so like he may have failed a class, you know, and that was kind of like that was a good change. That was a good, like, kind of, I think, impact point in my life. Cause I remember like I had failed that class and like I was going to drop engineering altogether and give up and that kind of thing. Cause like I had never failed a class before, like that kind of a thing. But like I kind of like had to learn, you know, I think another thing too is like you need help in life. Like you're not going to know everything. You're like, you can be smart, but like you're not going to be proficient at everything you know. But I was so prideful. Like I didn't want to go to tutoring. I didn't want to get help. I didn't want to use my resources. So like, you know, that was a good humbling experience for me where it's just like, oh, you know, don't wait too long to ask for help, especially if you don't get something. Cause like, you know, some people like, the funny thing is like someone told me like questions are free. Like it's so easy to ask questions, you know, like answers might be expensive, but questions are free. So like, I think that's something I took with me where like, okay, going forward, like if I'm struggling, if I don't know something, even in my current line of work, like, you know, I go to people that do know stuff. Like the best way to grow your knowledge set is by people that know stuff. So like I failed. Yeah. In the particular class I failed, it's kind of pivotal to civil engineering. So I was like, maybe this is not my thing, but I remember my freshman year, at UCF, they take you through like an intro engineering class, which basically they take you through all the different disciplines of engineering. So like, I remember looking back on that class and being like, industrial seemed kind of interesting because industrial is kind of like the crossroads of like people and engineering. So it's like an engineering of systems, like literally this thing called human engineering, like human engineering, ergonomics, system engineering, all that's under the industrial bucket. And I feel like that was better for me because it's more like systematic. And it's also like, for me, it's very important that like I kind of have that more tangible aspect of like what I'm doing. So like, even like when I started like Disney, it was hard at first because like, all right, I'm just telling you this number that this show did. But like kind of if I take like a back step to it and being like, oh, people are actually enjoying these shows, like seeing people, fans of this show, like go around. Like I went to Disney like this past weekend and seeing like, it was the last day of Muppet Vision and just seeing like the fandom for Muppets and like just seeing how like people like love their brands and love their things, like just being a part of that kind of gives me like kind of a sense of like, oh, okay, I'm actually like what I'm doing in line actually affects people for the better. And like kind of once I realized that, it makes like my job a lot more fulfilling, seeing that like it can kind of create that kind of thing. So Yeah, but that's kind of how I ended more on the industrial engineering path. Is like kind of like I looked in that, was interested in it, did that project. Actually, ironically, my first project was kind of about Disney, and how like basically like ticket price and all that kind of stuff. It's like to what extent can they keep charging? It was basically like a typical demand problem. Like to what extent can they keep charging and still be okay? And like it's Disney, so like they're very inelastic to where like people love it enough to where like they're willing to pay for it kind of thing. That was like kind of like my first kind of major industrial engineering kind of project. But went into that, loved it, and like I love different parts of it. Like I said, there's certain aspects that's more of like the manufacturing, like hardcore, like raw engineering that like are industrial too. That like wasn't my particular cup of tea, but I respect people that is their thing. But also there was very much the people aspect, like simulating a hospital, like that kind of thing. Like how fast can I get someone through a waiting line at a drive-through or a theme park ride, that kind of stuff. That stuff always kind of interested me. So that's kind of how I went more on that path. And then. Yeah, if you have any more like younger viewers that are kind of going through college, one thing I also encourage is like definitely don't make your college experience all school. Like I don't necessarily mean like partying and stuff, but I definitely mean like get involved with other stuff. Like for me, it was band. Like I loved, I was in marching band, I was on the drum line. So like that was kind of my like way to get out of the day-to-day just grind of just like raw school stuff. Like I always advocate for like, support yourself with something like more artistic, whether it's acting or music or creating content or even podcasts, like that kind of a thing. Like definitely like as humans we are social and we are artistic creatures. Like God made us very beautiful in a lot of ways. Like I feel like we in our grand design, coding was not the coding was not the like, important thing that we were designed for, that kind of a thing. So like I try to put that stuff in perspective sometimes. It's like, hey, I'm here to like live with life a certain way where like we're supposed to we are creations and we are to create, that kind of a thing. So
yeah, and one of the most biblical men of all time, David, was an avid singer and poet and musician. He was tri-talented in that way. So in there, okay, so man, that's dope. And I think already you've dropped some gems for people to be able to have in there. And you gave some of the hard skills that you looked at in terms of like the SQL 1, 2, 3, the SQL Zoo, the Google Cert, some of the soft skills that you mentioned. So now I'm curious. I want to kind of dovetail this into kind of how this all intersected with basically the piece that every young man is in some way either thinking about or spending way too much time on. And that is how all this interacted with your relationships and especially your romantic relationships and like what your journey through that process has been like.
Yeah. So my process, it's still in progress. But yeah, I definitely think like it's hard to balance, a relationship with your career, with your social friends aspect, with like, with you, like your spiritual aspect, like all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of things like vying for your time and attention. So I think it's super important to like prioritize those things, and then also to like be patient for certain things. Like I think distinctly for me, I remember when I was actually first getting my internship with Disney, I suddenly went from like, being kind of a relatively free college kid with a couple classes to like, I'm working 40 hours a week at Disney. I'm working 20 hours a week at UCF. And like, I'm also, trying that. And I had a girlfriend at the time. And it's one of those things where it's just like, I remember like those days of just like, all right, I'm trying to carve out one night, one night that we can spend together. Cause like I suddenly went from like being fully available to like not being available at all, that kind of a thing. And like, that definitely was happening then and like now. And I think, that relationship's over. But I think one thing I took out of that is like, you definitely need to be on the same page relationship wise. And like, ideally in the same like kind of like life space, because I think that was like my issue where like I was kind of like on this path to like kind of progress fast in my career. My partner at the time kind of like wasn't there at the time, So I think
so they could feel your absence a lot more.
Yeah. So it seemed like because they were definitely in their life of like, oh, I'm so used to like we can do whatever. All I have to do is worry about class. Like that's only priorities. So like me, it was like I have to worry about this thing, that thing, this bill, that kind of a thing. So there was just a lot more on my plate, and there was kind of like that disconnect of like understanding of like what I needed to go through, and then also like ultimately I couldn't meet their needs either, So definitely a trying time, but like I think I learned from that is like if future partnerships I have to like one, continue to prioritize. I think I did relatively okay with that. But also like with that is definitely try to make sure like you're in alignment in a lot of things. Cause like now I look at relationships completely different. It used to be like, are they pretty and nice? that was my low ball criteria. And now I'm very much like, I have to weigh, especially now that I'm like in my 30s, kind of like, and like, I have such aspirations of like, having children and like being a good father, like, it'll be a lot easier to be a good father if I pick a good partner.
100%. Absolutely.
So for me, I'm like, I definitely weigh more the aspect of like, are we aligned? I think the biggies are like financially, are we aligned? Spiritually, are we aligned? In terms of like where we are in life, what our goals are, like, are we going to be in the same place?
So, all right, let's go. I want to do minimums and maximums with you.
Okay.
What constitutes Auree's absolutely ideal, maximally ideal wife? Everything from diversity of looks. So I'll take you through some fields. So in terms of ethnical background or racial background, what would be your preference here?
I don't say I necessarily like have to have a preference. I think me growing up, since I grew around like, strangely I grew around like not very ethnically diverse places. I tended to like, I think first couple, like my first person I dated was like, was a white woman, that kind of a thing. And then I dated a Puerto Rican. Like for me, in terms of my taste, I probably like to go from every background and race. Cause like, I'm definitely a hopeless romantic type. But like, I think I definitely dove into this because also like being a Black man, like especially like in my spaces, like, I wasn't aware that people have like their preferences, like some people just straight up don't want anything to do with that type. Some people like, they almost like fetishize it in a way. So like, I have to be careful, like both those,
right?
know? Oh yeah. And definitely like, cause I definitely want to focus on like the person themselves. Cause like, looks will fade. And I feel like, at least from my things, like I remember like my last ex is one of those things where like, initially, like she wasn't necessarily my type to start out, but then she became my type. You know, so like it's like I looked at her culture, like looked at like the whole like Hispanic like culture completely different because of like my experience with her. So like I think that's kind of cool too. Is like if you interact with enough people, like I don't feel like people should have necessarily as rigid on their types and preferences because that can change when you interact with the right person.
100%. Oh yeah. So okay, open to all kinds, and any type of minimum or maximum height. I know some people can be a little iffy on that.
Yeah, nothing for me in terms of height. Like tall queens, short queens, like so it's just however you carry it. That's the biggest thing. So
okay, spiritual background.
So I think one of the biggest things for me is like. The best case scenario is that we're equally yoked and like, we share the same beliefs or very close to it. I'm not necessarily picky denomination wise. I definitely like would prefer in the Christian bucket just because it's so much easier to like share my beliefs. And also too, one of the important things, I want my woman to hold me accountable. Like if I'm drifting away from God or if I'm, not being me, which is core tenet of me, I want them to call me out. I want them to like, kind of hold me to that standard if I'm supposed to be like the head of the household. Like I know that's important for me. But I guess that aside, my biggest thing is I know I want to raise my kids up in the church.
Right.
Like my thing was like, all right, I'm dragging you to church to 16. After that, you make your decision. Right. But like that's my one obligation as a parent is I'm making sure I raise you in the church. And like ideally, no matter who the woman or whatever background is, I need her to be okay with like especially that notion. That's like that's a deal breaker for me is that particular notion is how I raise my kids. In terms of their background, like, there's a little wiggle room, but like I think as I get older, it's just so much easier just to be aligned, like spiritually, like
100%.
So
it's like when we're in the like 20s and it's like, do whatever you want to do. Hey, as long as we can sit down and talk civilly. Yeah. But like
now it's like, I gotta bring around my parents, and like we're gonna go to church if I go back home. Like, so like I just consider those things a lot more now. Like where we have our wedding, like I gotta have a wedding in a church, like like kind of a thing. So
in terms of, I guess, the space for wiggle room that you have, let's say that 100% is like, you absolutely have to be a Christian versus like, hey, if you're not a Christian, but you're okay with me raising our children as Christians until 16, then we can make it work. Even though that would be kind of unequally yoked, you're still willing to kind of work with that parameter that I've clearly established? Like, what's your space of wiggle room there?
I'd say, yeah, there definitely has to be a level of respect still for like my religion and my ex. Like, I don't want to necessarily have a person that's going to try to turn me away from what I believe in. Because I think I actually have a really good friend. They're like an atheist, but like I value that friendship just because like you don't know what you believe until it's get challenged. So like I kind of value the relationship just because like, okay, I know what I believe because they make sure I believe it, that kind of a thing. They question me all the time on my beliefs and that kind of a thing. So like, and they do it in a very respectful way. So like, that's why I appreciate. That's why we're friends. Because like, if they were like constantly attacking my religion, being like, oh, this is fake, this is that, like I wouldn't be friends with them. But they very much just like asks like the hard, honest, questions we get as Christians. It's just like, why did bad things happen to good people? Like all those kind of things. And like, I have to constantly explain. I have to constantly be like, hey, there's a lot of good in the world. Like things happen for a reason. It's all part of a divine plan that we don't know a lot about, So like, constantly having to like, check my beliefs, that kind of a thing is good. But like, I don't want necessarily it being attacked constantly.
Right.
Like,
okay.
I don't want to have to like, feel like I'm forcing you to like interact and do this thing. Like, I don't want to like a lot of the backlash on it. So also I think I would prefer like at least have some sense of like, at least bare minimum, like spirituality, like existence of a God, that kind of a thing. Because at least on my end, like I'm trying to like push my agenda, be like, hey, this is what I believe. This is the life I live. Like you should totally get with it. It's pretty cool. Like it's hard, but it's pretty cool. Like, cause like, this life is very temporary. And like, ideally, like I would love to like, I imagine like, me and my spouse in heaven, just like, enjoying it, that kind of a thing. So I don't want that in the back of my head of being like, okay, is my spouse, going to heaven,
right.
That kind of a thing. Like, I don't want to necessarily have that question in my head. So it's so much easier to top, but like, bare minimum, like if I am going to have a room, like there has to be at least a respect for my religion and not trying to like turn from it, to turn me from it. Cause like, that's the classic case when you like look at the Bible or like a lot of cases where like, that's always the fear being on the yoke is that they're going to turn you away from
100%.
God. So like, that's something I'm very cognitive of just like, bare minimum, I need someone that's going to respect that. That way I don't have to worry about if I'm trying to like, if I have to constantly fight those urges to like turn away from. So
this is opens up an opportunity for something that I know people of certain branches of like Christianity will cite, which is that people of different races shouldn't date, and they go and they use passages out of either Leviticus or Deuteronomy where God says, do not have your sons and daughters marry the sons and daughters of, and it'll list the people. And people think that that's saying, oh, these are different races of people, when really the focus is your God is me, and these individuals have different gods. Like the Moabites had different gods. Yeah. That's why it was such a big deal that, Ruth and Boaz ended up getting together because Ruth stayed with her mother-in-law after her first husband died. Is it Ruth or is it? I think it's Ruth, because Ruth was the super loyal daughter to the mother-in-law, right?
Believe so, yeah.
And so Ruth was willing to put down her God and totally go and follow her mother-in-law's God. And then her mother-in-law's God, of course, being in the same line as Boaz, ended up being the God of Israel, Yahweh, and she was willing to follow that God. And so it was never as we discuss here, and you mentioned like, hey, as long as a person is either essentially you said something that sounded enough like they had at least enough of a curiosity or open-mindedness to where they're okay with these things, but not actively hostile to it.
Yeah, and like like I said, I'll constantly be obviously like I think it's important. Like I'm gonna constantly be living the way I live, that kind of a thing. Like like for me in my house, that whole kind of thing. Like I know how I want to operate. But I think too, yeah, like ideally, like say like for whatever reason I'm in a situation where it's like that's not the case and we're not the same. Like hopefully the way I live will like basically like kind of steer them more towards that. That's ideally like the way I want to live, to where like, okay, if I'm setting the example, if like people can see Christ through me, I think that we would not do, because like ultimately like you can't force people to do things, which is like especially in the Christian realm, like I always have like an issue with people that just come to college campuses and just like scream like, oh yeah, you're going to the underworld, all that kind of stuff, like I'm like, because I think it's important, like people have to like choose God, like having a fear of like you're going to be not, you know, you're not going to go to heaven, like living through that kind of a thing. I feel like that's not the best way to operate. Like you need to operate through love. You need to operate through, this is the life we live. This is why we live it. We ultimately want to, you know, have that life of salvation. We want to be blessed, that kind of a thing. I feel like it's better to lead that way. And that's how ultimately I want to lead if like I'm in that situation. But yeah, ideally, and I remember too, because I actually had that situation, I think, with my very first girlfriend, that kind of case. Well, like, unfortunately, she went on a whole journey. Like when I first met her, she was like in relationship with Jesus status. Like that was like her Instagram handle. And then she kind of like steered away from that in the end, kind of a thing. But then I remember like reconnecting with her later, and like we were on campus, and like it was tough because like we were one of those people that were just kind of like screaming at all the students, being like blah blah blah, and they're just like, you know, oh, so you're gonna associate with this person, that kind of thing. Because I was like with her, and I was just like, you know, basically I was like, I will pray for her. Like that's all I could do. You know, it's like I will pray that she finds the way that I found the way. You know, because ultimately you can't force anyone to anything. You can't. You know, there's certain ways to go about things where like, you know, ultimately like I'm gonna live the way I live and like plant the seed per se, but God's got to water it. So best thing I can do is
they went from believing in Jesus, went on a path. You met up again in college, and now they were like the show up on campus like hellfire, brimstone, and all that.
Well, no, so they were like heckling the preacher person on campus.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So yeah, because unfortunately, like this thing too, like they didn't have, because they felt basically their issue with the church is they feel like they're very like brainwashy, which is the issue I think I've had with a couple of my friends and exes where like, you know, they've had solid foundation in the church, but something happened in the church that made them stray away. Like rather it was like the judgment, the brainwashing, as they say, or just like kind of like ungodly things in the church that basically caused them to like deviate from them,
and that's maybe we can have a little side tangent about that. Because that is one of the most common things. I think that has to account for at least 70 to 80% of people who either fall away from their faith or fall away from a belief in Jesus. It has to do with something related to the body of people in the church. And I don't know about you, but I almost see it in a way, in a sense, like I get how a person looks at some of these things that happen and they're like, oh, I don't want something to do with that. But I only get it from the perspective of a person who is looking at the most superficial layers and has the most superficial relationship with Jesus, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I feel too like it's very important to like with anything like know it for yourself, because like for me, my kind of like spiritual journey is like I literally grew up in the church. Like the current church I'm with, it started in my childhood home. My grandpa is my pastor. He's been my pastor my entire life.
Shout out to grandpa.
Yeah. So like that's my background. But like I would say like with that, it's kind of tough because like I was forced to go to church. Like I had to go. There wasn't a question if I went to go to church. So like, you know, I would argue that my spiritual journey was kind of like not necessarily forced, but kind of like manufactured in a way. So like I remember like, you know, I went to college and that was my first time like being away and stuff. And like, you know, I had my phase, I strayed away a little bit, but that kind of thing. And like once I like refound God, I was like, oh, like I found God. Like I know for a fact that this is a choice I'm making for myself on my own accord and I can follow. And I feel like that's what people need to really go through. Because I feel like a lot of these cases where people go astray is because it was basically just they were mostly following a routine or doing what their parents wanted them to do, and ultimately not really making a choice for themselves.
Going through the actions with none of the heart.
Yeah, so that's so important because like ultimately like, you know, you're supposed to give your life to Christ, but like a lot of people it's just a ritual of it. Like baptism is just a ritual, but like ultimately you really have to choose for yourself and have that relationship with God on your own accord. So,
yeah, and that's where it seems like it really does come from and sit with is like the ritualistic aspect of it and just doing the things because of maybe there's moments of intense feeling or like you feel like, oh, all of your friends are baptized and now you're the only one that's not baptized. Like all of these pieces in there. And then you see somebody at a certain level in the church, whether it's the pastor or whether it's a deacon or whether it's just somebody that's up there that you would have a higher expectation level. You know, a church scandal is nothing new in terms of the media zeitgeist that people have around it, or everybody's met like either the group of Christians in the church, or like the Christians here and there who are like the gossipers, da da da, like all the different things. And those things carry the most weight, I think, when a person is looking at the people as the mainstay of the church, as opposed to the calling of Jesus. Like I personally am a big advocate of being at a church that is really good, and even dealing with and helping to overcome, facilitating the process of overcoming maybe some of the issues and the pieces of sin that you see in it. And then at some point, if you just see that, you know, God calls you away from that church, then yes, leave that church. But like, don't leave it and then say the whole thing now is gone, and everything else is invalid because of select people or select issues. Instead, say, all right, well, this place served these good. Like it's interesting because we identify that people who look at exes and relationships in that way, like we would identify that these people have a certain amount of healing to go through. But we don't necessarily identify that there's that same amount of healing to go through, like when leaving or breaking up with a church that they've been associated with, had these emotions towards, these great experiences towards, but now the time for it has come to pass. And it seems like in the same way that if we take our faults that we committed within that relationship or within the church or potential misunderstandings that were had, if we were to take our portion of it and we were to be able to look at the goodness element of it, that would allow for a different post-conversation, a post-mortem conversation to be able to occur regarding the church. And there's been a lot of times that there have been insanely valid critiques of the church. I can think of things like doggone the shock therapy that used to be done, or like the hyper damnation judgment calling of some people. So yeah, that's my rant.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Yeah, no, it's hard because, like, you know, you're trying to basically, you know, aspire to perfection as imperfect people, you know, but you know, like you got to know, like people are always watching. That's one thing I found out. Like, the more I go through, like, people are always watching. Like, the higher you try to climb, whether it's professionally, spiritually, that kind of thing, people are always watching. They're watching your every move. Like, if you think people aren't, they are. You know, so like you always have to hold yourself to a certain accountability and standard to where, like, all right, you know. I usually always say, like, okay, if my mom's watching right now, would she be happy? Like, usually, like, if I have it, like, you know, if I put it like a person to it, because obviously God's always watching, but like, you know, if I actually put a physical person, like, okay, would I want them seeing me do this? That's kind of my good litmus of like, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing, kind of a thing. So,
yeah, it's man, in terms of looking at someone who could be that, like, I guess, in the element of, this is something that would be good to discuss here. I've been doing a lot of work with middle school boys and a lot of work with like younger 20s aged men who, and the commonality with all of it is either a struggle with respect for parents or a struggle with lust. I'm curious what your experience and journey with that has been, and how you've managed to navigate some of those parameters, even as you are seeking after a wife yourself.
Yeah, I'd say in terms of parents, yeah, like I think I went through your typical, like, I think late teens going into college. I had, like, you know, kind of back and forth. Like, my grandpa basically kind of stood in as my father figure. So like, and he was very much like, you know, he's head of the household, very much like, you know, does things his way, which, you know, to an extent, a lot of times it was just kind of like his way or the highway. And like, you know, occasionally we butt heads because of that. And I felt like, you know, a lot of times like my freedom was kind of stifled in a way. And like, you know, I think the biggest thing, especially now that I'm like, you know, aspire to be a father, like, you know, I realize it's hard being a parent. Like, you know, like, even because you see, especially with people that have multiple kids, like, you know, they do different things with different kids, because it's like, to what extent, you know, because like you have to fight, you know, your own generational issues that you've had. Like, for me, I know not having a biological father, there's things I'm just gonna have to overcome when I have my kids, you know. But I think ultimately for me, what worked for me is like, even if I didn't agree with my grandpa or, you know, my mom or that kind of a thing, like, I think it's still important to have a level of respect, you know? And I'm glad I did, because like we could have butted heads plenty of times, and like I could have felt that, oh, look around, everyone around me gets to do whatever they want to do, all that kind of thing. But like, you know, having now several years later being like, okay, I know that one, everything they did was out of love, and two, I turned out pretty well. Like, you know, like I could have been getting around a lot of foolishness. I could have like been a lot worse off in life. And like, I, you know, while, you know, whether you can say it's like helicopter parents, super strict parents or whatever, I feel like, you know, it made me who I am, and I feel like I'm better for it. Like I look back and I'm like, I'm glad I went through what I did, and I'm glad I handled how I did. Cause like, you know, me and my sister a little bit more of a firecracker. So my little sister, she would call me and be like, all right, I'm leaving. Can you come pick me up? Packing my bags and leaving. I'm like, no, don't do that. Like, I know, like, trust me, I've been there. I got it worse than you, because I was the first grandkid, you know, like, you know, so like that my sister's definitely more of like the confrontational type. So that's kind of funny. I'm like, hey, honestly, a lot of times you just gotta let people rant. You know, I literally gave her the playbook. This is how you deal with the parents. Like, you let them rant. You say, okay, I'll do better, blah, blah, blah. And then it'll go away like half the time. Like, so sometimes you just have to navigate that. And ultimately, like, you know, it's just like the perspective of parents, just know that ultimately, for the most part, most parents are coming out of the aspect of love, and they want the best for you. So you have to kind of, if you look at it from that lens, whether you like what they're doing or not, I think it helps with that, you know. And ultimately too, like, eventually you're gonna miss them. Eventually you're gonna be your own and be like, dang, these bills are tough, or dang, it's hard calling to make my own doctor appointment, you know, or like, you know, I need some advice. Like, how did you get through this? So like, you know, it's good to like always keep that relationship cordial as much as you can, even if you do have disagreements.
And I believe it's the fourth commandment in all of the commandments, even above "Thou shalt not murder," is to honor your parents. We can fact that check that real quick just to make sure I'm not spreading heresy. But in terms of as an adult, how do you continue now to honor your parents?
Definitely try to make sure that when I check in now, because like I think one of my friends have recently had, they really put in perspective, like once you go off to college and live your life, you know, especially if you're not close to your parents or you don't travel home a lot, like you could be in a situation where like, you know, let's say your parents are like in a couple states away and you visit them once a year. You may only see them 20 more times the rest of your life, or whatever their lifespan is. So like, I feel like it's very important that even when you become an adult, to value your parents, one, being around and what they have to offer. Like for me, one thing I've been trying to do now is that once a month, I'm going to drive to Daytona, take my mom and my little sister dinner, you know, basically making sure I have that time with them. And even now, like,
that's awesome.
And the older I get too, like the more, especially as I'm becoming more into like my manhood and like trying to pursue, you know, finding my wife and wanting kids, like, you know, like I have plenty of questions now. I ask my grandpa, being like, how did you navigate this? How did you do this? You know, my grandpa was another type where like, you know, he came from like, you know, rats in the floorboards, like that kind of a thing. And like he worked his way up to like, you know, work at NASA, that kind of a thing. So he was a very good template to like, you know, be like, hey, you know, you don't have a lot to start out with to like go to something big, you know? So like, there's another standard that was set for
That's awesome to
so like that. I pick his brain a lot, especially now, like just a lot of like man things. I remember like when I had my first breakup, you know, he was the one talking to me and just being like, you know, there will be other people, that kind of thing. Cause you know, like, especially when it's like your first, it's like, you know,
oh, it's the end of the world.
Yeah. Like I was going through it. Like, you know, like last breakup wasn't as bad in terms of just like, you know, the time frame to recover it, but like I need a solid like 6 months just to like be functional.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, that's fair.
So, but yeah, he was definitely one person I went through for that. So like, I think, you know, just knowing that, you know, your parents are always gonna be able to, they're always gonna be in a stage of life that you are currently in. So like, knowing that it's a valuable resource to like, there's always a resource you can go to, whether you have a good relationship with them or not, whether you know, question if they're competent or not, that kind of a thing. Like, no matter what, they've had that experience. And like, you know, outside of maybe like your spouse and maybe a couple close friends, they're going to know you best. So like,
and just as a clarity, so the fourth one actually has to do with the Sabbath. This is the final law that engulfs directly honoring God. It's the fifth law where it says, honor your mother and your father. And so, yeah, this just goes to show, like, in terms of God's, excuse me, in terms of God's pecking order, it goes respect all things God, and then immediately after your parents.
Because I figure, you know, I feel like too is like a karma thing too. Because like if I give my parents a hard time, I best believe my kids probably give me a hard time too. So like I'm trying to be right now. That way I don't have as much of a difficulty.
And then also it's like however much trouble you give your parents, they're gonna be like, yeah, I give the little baby a couple extra treats, a little bit of extra sugar snacks. Send them home all buzzed up to you. Sorry about this.
You're fine.
So that's towards that portion. And then how about with the portion involving the element of lust?
Yeah, I feel like it's so hard, especially nowadays. It's hard because like me growing up, like, you know, it was kind of like, okay, you just saw a pretty girl, that kind of a thing. But now like everywhere on every feed and every wheel, like there's just like things that will pop up. I'm just like, I don't know why I'm getting that on my feed, that kind of thing. So like lust is, I think, a lot, especially nowadays, it's a lot more prevalent than ever before. Because like you can just be minding your own business and it's like out there in the media, it's out there in the movies, the shows, everything, the advertisements, like it's everywhere. You know, it's kind of one of those things where like, unfortunately, it's a very, you know, in terms of, especially like in terms of advertising and marketing, that kind of a thing, like it's definitely a tool that's used. So like my thing with that is just like, you have to, one, if you can find your person as soon as you can, marry them right away. It helps a lot of that. That's probably the easiest way to get around that.
Brother, you ain't lying.
Yeah, I'm literally just like, sometimes I'm just sad. I'm like, dang, why could I just like find my high school sweetheart, marry her, and not have to worry about half this stuff, you know? So now I'm just like out here, just like, feel like I'm just dodging bullets sometimes, you know? But it's honestly, it's important to be mindful and also know that like that stuff's superficial. Like there's nothing like, you know, as much as like, you know, it's good to like look at this or like want that or crave that. There's nothing like having truly like your person that's meant for you. And like, that's something I found, or like, it doesn't even matter. Like, you know, cause my past is definitely not clean and I've had certain experiences that I'm like not proud of and that I've had to go through. But I've also had like visions of like, okay, when I'm where I'm supposed to be, this is what it's going to be like. And it's kind of the thing of like, there's a difference between like temporary happiness and like that dopamine rush versus like the joy that comes from true love and like the God's love, basically. Like there's a difference in the two. And like, I would basically, my best advice to that is like, you know, be patient and hold out, you know, cause like, you know, you're never going to be satisfied pursuing love. You never will. Like, it's just going to grow and grow. And like, you know, you think like you'll get somewhere, but like you ultimately won't. So I think that's a piece there that's important. So,
and on that note, I think this is a perfect time to share that. Do you know how my wife and I got together?
No, I don't.
So it actually comes, and I tell this whenever somebody asks whether it's like actually knowing somebody in the church or just random people, whatever. It always goes, I always tell them, I had a buddy that told me one time. And the buddy, this is the buddy, you guys. This man is the reason why I performed the way that I did and ultimately came to meet Shally. So we were having a conversation. And what you told me was, yeah, you know, I just open up the app and I just swipe on it and I just do the thing, you know, go until I run out of it. And then I get off of it. I don't spend no more time on it. And I heard that and I said, I mean, it makes sense. Like I go to the gym and sometimes I don't want to be on the gym, but I just show up at the gym, put in the reps. This is back when I was going to the gym consistently, folks. Not right now, you know.
You're still strong. It's all good.
And like I was doing that like with waking up, like reading my scripture in the morning at the time and reading like the book of like just for knowledge sake at the time. So I understood the concept of just showing up and putting in the reps. And I was seeing the fruit from that. So I said, you know what? Let me just show up and do the reps on the apps in the same way that you did. So I put zero emotion into it. I completely detached. I Jesusified the heck out of my profile, got on and did the stuff. And once I made it the most Jesus out it had ever been, like all up in the main picture and photos of friends involved with it, that's where I started to have my options kind of open up. And one of them was my now wife, who I went on the first date with her, identified this is someone worth putting a ring on, and then decided to cut out all the rest of it. But it was only because I'd used dating apps before and I was kind of discouraged off of them because of these previous experiences. I was never like the most successful with it. And then after you told me that, I was just like, you know what? no attachment to it. Because I was at a stage of life where between all the serving that I was doing and all that, I was genuinely good if I didn't find a relationship for years upon years. And then once I started to do it unattached to it and just being consistent and showing up for it, that's when I saw it like kind of open up. So yeah, you guys, my boy Auree is the reason that it ended up happening. So thank you for that bit there, my boy.
Awesome. I'm enlightened. He made a lot of good points, because I think where I am currently in my journey is kind of that aspect of like, because like I feel like I've always been kind of that hopeless romantic. Like it's like one of those things where like it's really good that I aspire to be a good husband, but like if I let it consume me and if I want it that badly, and like I put it above like even like God and like everything else I'm doing, like that's like I'm better now, but I felt like that was an issue I was getting into where like you know, you get always anxious of like I gotta find my person, I have to do this, I have to do that. But now, yeah, like I said, now it's more of the aspect of like, you know, ultimately you got to just be available, like prepare. Like one of my old bosses, I think one of the best things to take with me is like, good luck is the cross section of opportunity and preparation.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm like, for me, God's providing the opportunity, but I have to be prepared. So that's kind of what I'm doing now. That's what I do when I'm like, you know, putting in my effort on the apps, when I'm like taking care of myself physically, when I'm like, you know, making sure like I'm getting my finances up and everything right. Cause ultimately, like, you know, ideally when the opportunity goes, I want to take it.
100%.
You know? And like, you know, I think you mentioned too, like, especially I feel like for guys, like once you kind of get in that space where you're serious about things, like you meet a person, like you're going to know. Like most guys, like I feel like you have a good sense of like, once you meet a person, like, okay, are they a person I'm going to wife or not? Like, I feel like you kind of have that innate kind of feeling in you once you're like in that good headspace of like, this is what I want, you know? So
I guess in the vein of that, that thought pattern there, like what is kind of, do you have, and this is something that can be dodgy in terms of the conversation around it, but do you have like an age range in terms of maximally young and old that you would be willing to go for a partner?
I think definitely having children is important for me. But you know, there's miracles every day. Like you can have kids very, very late these days. We have advances in modern medicine in there. So like, you know, ideally that's kind of a thing to me, like to an extent where like I could still hopefully have biological children. Like that's important for me. But otherwise, like, you know, I've met young people that are, you know, I've met like very young people that are wise beyond their years, and I've met a lot of old people that are immature. So like, it's like for me, age is like less. The only thing really age wise is just kind of the more biological aspect of it. But like, I feel like definitely above age is more so their mindset and their maturity of like where they are in life. So I don't necessarily put a thing on that because, like I said, like especially like you know this whole thing of like, yeah, you want the younger woman because like you know that's the most attractive, whatever. And I'm like, all right, what happens in 10 years?
Oh, yeah.
Because eventually, 100%. You know, like there has to be some base level of attraction for sure. But I feel like if you're banking everything on, I need a young, good looking, you know, hot wife, like that's not going to last.
Oh, yeah, for
so, like,
sure.
That's not the way to go about things. So for me, I'm definitely like focus a lot more on like the, you know, can we build, can we grow? You know, are you in a good headspace to where like we can grow together? You know, because like you know, some like I said, I think before like when my was like we were just in different phases of life. So like you know, if you're not in the same space, you know, not necessarily age, but just like in terms of life and like where you are mindset wise, it's going to be a lot harder. So,
all right. So I get that. I want to ask it in this way here though. On the app itself, what are you setting as your range?
Let's see. I think my current.
I know I'm kind of putting you into it like a.
No, you're fine. Yeah, no. I used to have like, yeah. I think I started out. I think it was like 21 to 31, but like now I'm just like at least where I am in life. Like I just need a certain level of like maturity now. So like I've like bumped up to like right now I'm like 25 to 33. So like,
I think that's a really solid range. Because I think that's that's literally right in the range of what I was thinking.
Yeah, because I personally I would like to be the older one, but like if they're a little older, that's whatever. Like,
and to be fair, most women, like my wife, she was looking for an older guy when she found me, and they're just she gone through the gambit of them.
Yeah.
So to be fair, you probably are likely to get a woman who's looking for a guy a year, 2 years, 3 years older. So
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, man. Sounds reasonable. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, trying to be reasonable because like it's one of those things where like one of those things, like, end of the day, if it's your person, whatever their age happens to be, kind of a thing. So I tried not to, like, I definitely try to, like, open up. I don't like to try to be as rigid on ages now, just because, like, you never know what people have gone through, what's going to happen if, like, the right person for you. Cause, like, if my person happens to be 10 years older than me, then I guess they're that my person. Cause if they're not my person, then I'm going to feel that way about them, you know? So, like, who am I to, try to put a cap on what God has for me, So.
Absolutely. What is the greatest way that you battle lust? What is your greatest tool, and how do you overcome the feelings of shame in the times where you have failed to lust?
I would say immediate, not best answer is I just keep busy. Like, if you don't have time to lust, you can't, So that's usually how I function. Like, if I have enough things going on, or it's hard to, like, that, but that kind of falters then when you're, like, by yourself and have nothing to do, So, like, that's kind of like usually my first kind of shield of defense is just keep myself, doing things, whether it's, work, friends, that kind of a thing. But then, and then there's, like, kind of quieter moments, that kind of thing is really just, like, trying to.
And I guess that's what I'm speaking to, because I think of several young men that I've talked to recently who, whether it's they're out of a job recently and now they're just, like, doing the grind of applying to a bunch of places, and it's the summertime, so they don't even have school that they're doing right now. They're just like, I've got some days that I can spend with people at church, and I've got some, like, my family doesn't live here. So it's like, if, while I'm doing these applications, it's like, what else am I doing?
Yeah. I think, the biggest thing, I think for me, is the notion of, like, that's, like, kind of slept on, is, like, delayed gratification. And that happens in a lot of things. You see it in, like, finances, like compound interest, like, give stuff enough time, invest early and invest over time, things will grow, like, for me, I'm like, okay, cool. I really, like, grinded. Like, I was like, I'm going to get my engineering degree, leads to, like, higher paying job later, that kind of a thing. So I feel like, kind of not taking the easy, quick, kind of satisfactory way out, and knowing that there's a bigger picture and a bigger goal that you want to have. So I think that's for me how I look at it, where, like, okay, there's, like, certain, like, temporary gratifications that come with lust, but, like, ultimately it's very vapid in a way. And ultimately it's not where you want to be. So, like, I'd rather, for me, like, in this time I could waste my time lusting over here, or I could be, like, trying to figure out, okay, what's the next thing I can do to get to where I want to get, So I feel like, especially with lust too, it just becomes a cycle. And next thing you know, you're in the same spot you were 5 years ago, just because you're driven by lust and not by, the things you should be driven by to get to your goals. So,
man. Yeah, that is easily the most reoccurring element that I've seen, like, where I've, whether it's talking to middle schoolers or talking to young 20s guys, that I have just consistently seen, and this is over very high performing young men, is that they are broken with their inability to resist it in some form. So yeah, definitely wanted to get your touch and thought on that.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's hard. It's hard, but, like, I think that's the thing too. I found, if something in my entire, like, career path or just life path, if something's hard and you need to overcome it, that's probably the right thing to do. Like, if it's not easy, that's probably the right way. Like, Christ being crucified was not easy.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of things in life aren't easy, and that's just, like, the path we live. But typically, if you overcome those hardships, that's where you find that success. That's where you find that salvation. That's where you find, kind of like an avenue that's greater than, things that were hindering you. So, but yeah, no, it's hard for sure. But it's just kind of like, hopefully over time, especially if you really commit to it, you have to develop that kind of mental discipline of just, like, this is what I want for my life, and the only way I can get there is to not waste my time with these kind of things. So.
Absolutely. And as you said, like, the element of allowing yourself to be busied with good things, like, for one of the young men that I talked to, like, one of my biggest things was, hey, you have all this time off right now. Like, every week there's a group of men who get together and they do work for, whether it's single moms or widows. They do some type of service for these people. Like, doggone get in contact with these dudes and like learn how to doggone change the ceiling fan with them, like they're always talking about them doing, or putting up a fence, or just all these different tasks that involve you being around older men who absolutely want to pour into you. That's part of the reason that they're putting these projects together, is so that one, they can do something that the Bible calls us to do, which is take care of the orphans and the widows. And two, it allows for a time of community get together. And it's not a thing that like some churches do it, but like this particular church has it set up where on a weekly basis, you know, this thing is going on. So like, dude, utilize that thing.
Yeah, that's cool.
I think I find myself, and I'm curious what your thought would be. Like, I can find myself sometimes becoming irritated with someone who finds themselves struggling with a sin, but then putting themselves and continuing in the same patterns that enable that sin to occur, including myself. Irritation extends to myself.
No, I feel the same. Yeah, irritated with that happens to people. Irritated with myself when that happens. Yeah, like, yeah, because like that's the thing is like, you know, it's just like I said, it's a cycle. Like, you know, if you put yourself in the same situation with the same choices, do the same thing, like very rarely will you have a different result. You know. So yeah, it's definitely important to like in those cases really try to like also too like in terms of this like kind of the more mental aspect, really diagnosing like what happens. You know, like for me, I know for certain things, like for me, boredom is like, you know, the devil's vice for me. So like I know I'm like, all right, I need to basically be active and like really establish like, okay, I'm never gonna be bored. I'm either gonna be resting or working. You know, one of the two. Like that's my goal. I don't ever want to be just idle because like that's, you know, that's the thing that gets me. So like kind of figuring out like what are the certain like conditions and stimulus that you're in that kind of makes you more apt to have those pitfalls. I think once you identify those, avoiding those is good. And that's like, you know, that's for those things, but like general, that's like how you deal with certain traumas too, you know, kind of like, how do I get around my triggers? How do I, you know, basically not put myself in situations, which is the thing too, especially like going back to lust, like, you know, it's very much a product of your environment. Like if I'm around people and places and things where like that's prevalent, like what do I expect is going to happen? You know, it's kind of like wherever, like the environment you're in, the things you put yourself in, like that usually it's kind of like the whole notion of bearing good fruit. Like if it's a good tree, it's going to bear good fruit, you know. True. If it's a bad tree, it won't, you know. So like that's very much, you can extend that to like your walks of life and where you are of what's going to happen. So.
Yeah. And I guess that really extends to like the things that you yoke yourself to. A conversation I was having with my wife involved like, if I'm a person who my lifestyle is not like going to a bar, for example, but let's say there's like a special event where a person wants to go to a bar. Like, what's the difference between am I yoked to that person or am I yoked to that environment? And like the difference is like a very slight, careful difference. Like it's a difference of, is this person pulling you in a certain direction or are you allowing your place and excuse me, are you allowing your stance with Christ to be what is moving things, or are you allowing that place or that person to be what is determining a direction that you're moving in? Like if I showed up at that bar and because it was a celebratory night, I'm saying, oh yeah, I'll go shot for shot with you. Well, maybe now I'm yoking myself to that person in those activities. Yeah. But if I show up and I say, hey, look, because it's a celebration, here's what I will engage in and here's what I'm not going to engage in. I think that is a way to be setting the standard and moving at the pace of what your conviction is saying that is still honoring to the Father and whatnot. And similarly, in terms of the conversation with lust, it's like if you're in even just environments that gets you spurred and then you notice a pattern of like, man, whenever I go to this type of place, you know, like for example, we used to do dance, right? And all kinds of attractive women showed up for dance class. And if ever that spurred either of us, that would have been something to let us know, hey, this place is a good place. This is not a sinful thing. However, because we struggle with that thing of conviction in a certain manner, maybe we just shouldn't be going to either this style of dance or dance classes in general or whatever the case might be. And then we have to take action according to it. And that could extend to really probably anything. It's like some things are just naturally more sinful for some people because of their wiredness than they are for others. Like for me, I know I have a sin nature when it comes to my phone because I can spend hours on a mobile game and it causes a lack of productivity.
Yeah.
So for you, I could hand you my phone with all these games on it and you'd be like, okay, I haven't touched that thing since you handed it to me. If I had it in my possession, I'm like, oh man, I probably spent like 4 hours on a game today or on various games today. So that's also an element at play as well.
No, yeah, that's a good point. Because everyone has their different like vices, and even like when we look at addiction, it's kind of like for certain things, some people are just more prone to certain things than others, and like it's like good to be aware about it because like for some of my friends that have like gone through the AAA program or whatever what's called, it's like they're like I can't even have a drink, otherwise like I'm down the rabbit hole. But me, I'm like I can have a casual drink and like be fine, So it's like it's definitely important to like be aware of what your things are, which is good that you get back from like me. Yeah, definitely. Like my thing is like I tried, like I've done like I'm not even gonna download TikTok. Like I don't even have the app because I'm like I'm just gonna doom scroll and I'm not gonna be where I need to be, So like, but like next thing I know, like Facebook and Instagram have very similar reels and stuff. So I'm just like darn, like it's everywhere. The traps are everywhere, So like you can do certain things to an extent, but yeah, it's just like definitely important to be mindful of like what your things are for sure.
Speaking of the traps everywhere, this has been something that I think we spent a good portion like talking about the work and the effort that we put into things like ascending in career or obtaining a relationship that's godly. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the element of rest. And not just sitting rest, but actually intentional rest, a holy rest, a Sabbath. What is your past and current relationship with a Sabbath and with the concept of resting, and how do you passively or actively rest when you do it?
Yeah, so for me, so my Sabbath, like we kind of denoted, like my daughter says, like on Sunday. And like, I'm blessed because like some people, unfortunately, like job things happen, they have to work on Sunday. I've been fortunate to have my regular Monday through Friday 9 to 5. So like, I usually don't never work on Sundays. I don't think I've ever worked on a Sunday. So like that's a good start. It's just in general, just having that. But for me, it's like typically on Sunday, kind of have my same routine. I wake up, do Sunday school, do church, and then a lot of times just chilling. If I'm home with family, usually we'll go out to dinner. If not, usually it's like, watch the football game, that kind of a thing. So usually Sundays for me are like definitely kind of a day of mindfulness, the day of like just kind of like relaxing mentally. Just rest in general, yeah, it's definitely important because like one of my flaws I need to be better about is sleep. Just quality. Like I'm lucky enough to where my body functions. Like I don't necessarily need 8 hours, but I at least need 4. Sometimes I don't be getting those 4.
Oh my goodness.
And like, I love to say it's because I'm working so hard and stuff, but no, sometimes I'm just wasting time. Like,
man.
So definitely for me, I know one thing I want to improve on is like how much sleep I'm getting in, like, because like usually if I can at least get some sleep, I'm lucky enough to where like I have a good quality of sleep, but like I definitely still need to allocate time to it. And then in terms of just like when I think of resting in general, it's important to like for me, I definitely have my like kind of my mental rest things. I have like, for me, I like to do poetry. So I like to like, basically put my thoughts down in a poem form and like, I like post them, that kind of a thing. Music can be a powerful way to rest. Kind of just like getting in a space where like, at least for like a certain dedicated span of time, you're going to basically make yourself not worry about, work or this or that kind of a thing. So for me, I try to build it in to where like, if I have friends, I'm like, okay, cool. This Saturday we're having a hangout. We're going to Disney, or like, this day here, I'm going home. Because usually like me, I love going home because going home is definitely a nice refresh. Going home, seeing mom, going to church, like that's kind of like probably like my best kind of like rest practice is like doing that. But in general, yeah, no, that's a good point. Like I think it's definitely ironic something that's slept on is like getting quality rest. Cause like especially like in today's society with all the pressures to succeed and like provide and that kind of stuff. It's so easy to burn out in jobs. And like, I always tell people, like, I think especially for me, I was always the type to just try to like go, do everything. Cause like, I'm definitely a person that's better busy, but also even I have my limits. So like, you know, if I'm extending myself to other people, to other jobs, to other things, and like not taking care of myself, then like, you know, I'm no good to people if I fall apart.
100%.
You know? So that's one thing I like, probably the last like couple of years I've like cultivated better is being like, hey, I got to make sure that me first, in terms of me, I have to make sure I'm right before I can like start making sure I'm right for other people, you know?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And that rest element, man, it's crazy how important it is. And I didn't engage in the Sabbath too much in terms of like having like a dedicated set apart day for most of my Christian walk. And it was really probably somewhere within the past like 5-ish months that I was like, all right, you know what? I'm gonna intentionally have a Sabbath. And my version of it was I wanted to get as close to doing nothing extraneous as possible. So like some versions of that were like, you know, going to watch a movie and seeing a movie that I enjoyed. A portion of it would be like worship and just like I love to read. Reading is like a thing that I always feel guilty about because I feel like reading isn't actively moving me closer towards a goal. So I allowed myself to like read some scripture and then also read like a book on some type of health and then some book that's like on a thing. And then I allow myself to journal and I'll just spend hours doing all these things that normally I feel some amount of guilt towards. Multiple worship sessions in there, maybe have like a couple of brotherly chats with some guys and call them, hey, what's been going on with this and that? Tell me about da-da-da-da-da. And the days where I am genuinely in that flow where I'm not just finding myself just overly busied with like, you know, like getting on my game for like 3 hours of it or performing like whatever task and being like, oh, well, I'm on the couch, so technically I'm still resting. But the days where I'm like intentionally, actively resting and resting with God, oh my goodness, I have felt the difference in my soul. And here's another thing too that I realized as well, is that when you are in that act of resting with God, you find so much stimulation up and positive directions to move forward with other tasks that you might have otherwise been just brick walling against. Like there have been some tasks that I've been like stuck on for like a week to 2 weeks, and then I have a Sabbath and I'm just allowing myself to rest, and the gears are just turning now from that lack of stress. And I'm like, wait, this would be a really good thing. Like me and a buddy of mine, we often laugh because when we do our talks on Thursday, I will come and I'll have like this word because there's a men's breakfast that I go to on a regular basis, and I'll call him and be like, man, I just got this word and I was thinking about this concept and it hit me like this and da-da-da. And he'll be like, are you going through a manic moment right now? And it's just like, man, things just really resonate on a deeper spiritual level when like the space is cleared and all of this time is spent with God. Like it's kind of eerie not making it busy with all of these other plans that it could be busy with. But man, like I tell people, like I think of my Sabbath thing as like you know, not a yes or no thing, but it's more of on a scale. You know, like the ideal Sabbath is probably like Friday at like 6 p.m. through like Saturday at 6 p.m., which is ironically also like when most of the sin temptations occur.
Sure.
So it like knocks out that portion there. And it's spent doing like some of those activities that I mentioned. But then like a level 2 Sabbath might be like, okay, I'm like running around. Somebody needed help with this thing, so I went to go help them with that thing. And then maybe I spent like an hour or two too much longer on social media, or most of the day on social media. And I was just sitting around watching TV, and my parents or siblings or somebody were having an argument, and I had to like deal with that. It's like, okay, I didn't work, but that wasn't restful at all. But then like where I think I find myself a lot is like either the like level 5 to level 8 Sabbath. Level 5 is like, okay, I recognize I'm on my phone. Let me put that away. Let me turn on the worship. Let me open up some books. Level 8 is where it's like, I'm not even struggling with the phone. I'm like, okay, today's my Sabbath. I want nothing to do
Off grid
with that junk. Yeah, totally off grid, totally on with Christ and all these readings and like, so like the goal is definitely those level 8s, but like it's actually surprising how difficult it is to rest. Resting is harder than working a lot of times.
That's true, yeah, because you're so conditioned to like do a certain thing, But yeah, I think I remember you saying like, yeah, it's hard for me sometimes. Just like I feel guilty, like just like been watching anime because it's kind of like, all right, this is cool, and like I'm watching this thing and this is a really cool story, blah blah blah. But then like, what am I getting out of it? It's kind of like, even general, like I definitely was the type to just like, it's good that my grandpa's a good example because like my grandpa's my pastor. Like his pastime is like he'll just watch movies, like the same old movies on Sunday. He'll just like throw a movie on and watch it. And like in my head, I'm like, I never got it. Like, you've already seen this movie. Like, like why do you need to see it again? That kind of a thing. But I feel like it's definitely a part of that process of just like, decompressing and that kind of thing. Cause like, if you've already seen it, you don't have to like really be engaged in it. It's just kind of just be on the background. So like, I've been trying to be more mindful of like, not everything has to be results driven or productive. Cause like, it's kind of like my analyst life sometimes creeps into like what should be my regular personal life. But yeah, I've definitely tried to make it to where like, okay, cool. It's okay to be a little lazy. It's okay to necessarily like not everything has to have a goal of productivity,
Yeah.
Because like the thing is, like, I think we were saying too, like kind of like when you get those enlightening moments, because your brain is always working. You give it a task, even when you're sleeping, it's always working.
Nope.
But a lot of times it can't communicate with you its results until you like sit down, A lot of times too, like especially like, especially if I'm through prayer, like God answering you, it's like he's trying to talk to you.
Yep.
But you're too busy that you can't hear it. So like
100%.
So that's why a lot of times you'll get like the shower epiphanies or like the 2 a.m. in the morning, like kind of like, oh, cool, that's the thing. Cause like it's those moments of like, okay, now that you're not busy, you can get those answers that, they're coming from your mind, coming from God, that kind of a thing. So
yeah, man. And like you said, the either the shower moments or the poop moments. 100%. So in that, like for you, how have you built your systems in such a way that facilitate and this is kind of a super general question, and maybe we can sub it down in more helpful ways, but building systems of resilience for yourself that allow you to handle everything, including your financial health, your spiritual health, your mental health. Like, what does a day for Auree look like on a regular basis?
Question. I guess in terms of just like the building resilience part and that kind of a thing, I think the biggest thing for me is really like trying to deep dive into like, who am I and who do I want to be? That kind of a thing. And like what goals I want to set. And like once I've kind of established those, that kind of like lets everything trickle down from that. So like, like if I want to be, a good husband one day, well, I have to make sure that first I'm a good person. I have to make sure I'm a good communicator. I have to make sure that I'm living with love. I have to make sure I have myself together, because it's like, I'm not trying to, I'm trying to like, hopefully my future spouse doesn't have to, basically work too hard or anything really. Like hopefully I got it. That's my goal. So like, I think kind of like having those kind of goals and kind of like guardrails of like, okay, this is the avenue I want to go on. This is how I want to get there. That helps you kind of like piece down things easier. So in like a day of my life, like a lot of times, like I think one of my biggest tools is I have a dry erase calendar, and it's definitely dry erase because things be changing. But I think that's a good tool of just like, visually seeing, okay, what
How many calendars do you have, by the way?
I have one big dry erase one and then one digital one.
Okay.
But like my giant dry erase one is like on top of my fridge. I see it every day I walk through. That kind of gives me my macro like monthly look. And then I'll use my digital one for like my day to day, like, my work meetings or my friend hangouts, or anything like more like granular details. That's kind of like at my digital like weekly level. So that's kind of how I've kind of been what's worked for me, for sure. Cause like, I got in trouble of like over promising things and double booking myself too many times. And I was like, I can't keep living this life.
Yeah.
So I definitely try to like, have that framework of like, all right. Cause there's been plenty of times where like, I've looked at my calendar, I'm like, oh, I have 4 straight days of social interactions. I'm like, I'm not for it. Cause like I'm an introvert at heart. Like, I think professionally and like terms of the teacher aspect, I definitely become a little bit more extrovert as time go on. But like at my heart, I'm an introvert.
Feel it.
So like I look at that calendar, I'm like, I gotta move one of these around because so it's kind of saved me because like I'll definitely burn out socially, especially like with like certain people. Like there's certain people I'm like, all right, cool. Like my best friend is like no energy lost socially, no social battery isn't drained with him. Yeah. But like with certain people, certain groups, certain aspects, it can drain you very quickly. So I have to 100%. Be like aware of what we're doing and who's going to be there. That way I know mentally, okay, cool. I have this much to expend. That way I don't burn out kind of a thing. So,
absolutely.
But yeah, I guess a regular day of my life is work. So usually wake up, try to have breakfast, depending if I'm like, doing like a little health fast or not. But then, do my work, typical 9 to 5. And then after that, depending on the day. So like Mondays, usually my social days are like Mondays and Thursdays in terms of like hang out with friends. Wednesday nights are typically Bible study for me. So I kind of like block out that night to do Bible study. Or if I don't have Bible study, then I'm chilling. Fridays are like, if someone's got something going on, I may do stuff on Friday. Otherwise I'm chilling. Like honestly, I chilled this last Friday night. I'm like, it's kind of nice. Like just
you said you chilled?
Yeah, just being home on a Friday night, not having obligations. That's kind of nice. Saturdays are usually my like big like go to theme parks, catch up with people, drive somewhere. Like probably Saturday is my biggest like social go out and do something kind of day. And Sundays.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought of having like a whole like original style Sabbath Friday, like that Friday dust?
No,
to like
Saturday I never thought of that concept. That's kind of cool. I feel like that definitely will work for some people because like I'm looking to have like a 9 to 5. I know a lot of people do not have a traditional like work schedule, so like it may work better for them because like because like the day of Sunday itself just doesn't always work for certain people, just given certain obligations and whatnot. But yeah, that's a cool thought. So yeah, but I never thought about that. But yeah, like Sundays for me, like it's very traditional, like church in the morning, chilling the rest of the day. Yeah, I try to put, I try to, for me personally, I try to like, in terms of like my calendar, I usually don't really plan things on Sunday, especially socially, unless it's like someone's birthday particularly, like something like that, where like, okay, that day's particular is important, then I may like skirt around it. But typically like if I'm planning something, I'm just heavy loading it on like Friday, Saturday.
Yeah, for sure.
Cause I'm just like, cause honestly too, it's like one of those things, like I need a day for God, I need a day for myself. And that's a good day for both of those to be accomplished. So yeah. Cause like one of the days, cause typically, cause unfortunately, like if you work 5 days a week, like you got 2 days. So like one of them better be you just chilling and resting.
Oh yeah.
And the other day can be for your socials and chores and stuff. Like that's usually how I like try to like frame up those days. So.
Yeah. I know for my wife and I, like I used to be just a million different things and whatnot. Yeah. And I've really had to pull back a lot of that. But something that my wife has said that recently that she wants to try with me is kind of a Friday through Saturday Sabbath type of thing. And like, I'm like, there's like a Bible study a men's Bible study that I know was going on that night. It's like such a good thing. And then, Saturday is like a day to hang out with like family and and it's like, oh man, taking that whole period of time to just like, it would be a wild thing for me, but I'm gonna indulge it because I know, and I think about this concept, like someone that I was talking, and this, mind you, this was like a more like law-based person who was like, oh, the Sabbath is, you must keep the Sabbath type of thing. They made the point and they said, the reason why Fridays and Saturdays are always so busy, packed out, all the best events are happening Friday night and Saturday, all throughout Saturday, is because the devil knew that was the true day of Sabbath. and culturally worked to make it so that it was impossible to say no to that time frame.
Truly, because I've heard like a lot of people celebrate, I think Saturday is their Sabbath. I know, like depending on like your denomination or like kind of what sect you come from, some people make like Saturday their Sabbath. So
yeah, and like that's a very like, you know, hardcore like either Hebrew Israelite or like Jewish way of looking at it, and but to a certain point, like I'm like, I mean, I don't agree with the strictness of how you look at it, but I can see your point actually, because like I think of like all the Friday night club deals that go on, or like this is like the time when people are going out, you know, all the stuff that we know, that even Christians have been known for, like, oh, you know, partying on Saturday night and then coming into church Sunday morning type of deal. I'm like, huh. So yeah, that's something that we're gonna take a soiree into.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, because it's definitely like a just development of time in terms of like culture of just things, you know. Yeah.
But you were telling us about your how you navigate all of your pieces of health, mental, physical, spiritual.
Yeah. So like mentally, I would say, let's see here. Yeah. So physically, I've definitely been good about, because I have an Apple Watch. So like we try to close those rings. So, that's probably like physically what I try to do. I'm like kind of just setting goals. Cause like, you know I have like an ideal place I want to be, but like, I know the only way to get there is like take it in chunks. Cause like you can easily just, do the unhealthy way of just like, I'm just going to starve myself. I'm just going to work myself to death. But then like with those things, typically, it's short lived and then you just gain all the weight back, or you fall back into bad habits. Like some of that stuff's not sustainable. So I've been very much trying to like, just like everything, like, compounding good habits, that kind of thing. Cause like very few things can break good habits, time over good things over time, compound. That's like kind of the aspect of it. So I'm trying to keep my health right now where like, cause ideally, I want to like live long enough to like basically experience those kids and grandkids and that kind of a thing, cause like what's the point of putting all this work into life if I don't live long, So I've been trying to definitely physical health and take care of that way. Emotionally, I would say basic notion of being kind, the grace, the value of myself. That's super important. Cause like I put a lot of pressure on myself. But I feel like that's just something I've been working on to where like, hey, at the end of the day, you're just human. You are trying your absolute best. And like, my thing is if I go into something, no matter what it is, and I try my absolute best, I kind of like train myself to live with it. Like if I go to audition and I try my best and I don't make it, it's cool. It wasn't meant for me. It's God's plan for someone else. That's how I look at things. Like if that job promotion wasn't for me, that kind of a thing, I know that, hey, it's not like, it's never that I wasn't good enough. It's just that, hey, someone else was better in this moment for that opportunity, So I think I've tried to really change my perspective on that kind of thing in terms of just like how I look at myself and how I like treat myself. And then mentally, it's a lot of, especially my line of work, it's definitely balance. Like we kind of talked about, like being mindful of how am I going to rest, being mindful of like, all right, how do I get away from the numbers and the coding and statistics? Like for me, like I said, it's writing and typically music. Those are my avenues. And I advise, like, if you haven't found your like, your art, your other thing that's not your day-to-day job, or if you're lucky enough to where like, if your job is something you can enjoy, you really love it, cool. Like you are one of the few lucky ones. But if you're like in that space of just like the jobs as a means to an end, then definitely try to find your other avenues of like, fulfillment for sure.
Awesome, man. Well, I know we are beginning to start press up on the edges of your availability here. So we'll go ahead and transition to the closing segments of the show. So at this time, feel free, you may ask any 3 questions that you have of me, and I will answer them totally honestly. You can even, poke and prod at little places that you want, and I'll give you what I got.
All right. So first thing is, what is something right now that you're actively trying to learn?
Oh boy. Man, and just generally anything that I'm trying to learn. I guess right now I'm trying to learn probably what the heck my next steps are. I'm in a season of life right now where everything around me is changing. The church that I've been going to, that you've gone to with me, that I've been with for about the past 4 or 5-ish years, I have only literally within the past like week recently departed from that church. So detangling a lot of the emotions from that and stepping into this next season of life at a new church, like learning what exactly that is. I'm also at a stage where I'm looking at actively producing income. I've been doing the podcast thing for a couple of years, and I said, hey, I want it to be at a certain goal. I'm not at that goal, so now I have to step back into the job market space. So our conversation that involved like what to do to make yourself more marketable, that applied to both the new college students graduating, but also me, because I've been out of the job market for 2+ years now. So now there's a gap in my resume, and I have to in some way account for that to employers. And so figuring out like a new job situation, I have decided to not take on new ministries at the new church, to kind of take like a year gap in that in order to be more intentional with my wife. We never learned each other in that first year. It was very much hit the ground running kind of a deal. And so learning how to have a life that isn't filled with ministry constantly is a new piece in there. So, I'm learning everything again right now, bro. Yeah. It's almost overwhelming.
Makes sense. Yeah, no, but I think it's. I feel like it's scary, but also exciting because, like, who knows where you're gonna be, and I'm sure that's gonna be a good direction because you've got the right base around you. So
prayerfully,
yeah. But a notion, because like I don't know what it's like to have a wife. So I guess your next question is like, I guess what is something that like by being married and having like, what is like, I guess something that you kind of learned that you didn't necessarily like expect to like know from that experience, like.
How much? So the fruit of the spirits are love, joy, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control. There's always one that I miss.
Long suffering.
Long suffering. That's one that I definitely indulge in. But I think that I've known that love was important, and joy and peace. I think that what being married has taught me is how important it is to embody the fruit of the spirit that is gentleness. I'm very used to having conversations with people where you can either directly call out what a person is doing, or you can say something like in a joking manner and it not be taken a certain way. And I've had to learn that, man, when you have a wife, like the level of sensitivity there is unlike any other relationship that you have. When you have a wife that plays by God's handbook, where she looks at you truly as the spiritual leader, where, she's going to voice her opinion, but ultimately the full decision is yours. And like the magnitude of how much this person values your presence. It's been constant learning of the fact that I can't be as blunt with her as I am with most people. And I can't be, if I am going to be even as honest, I won't say I can't be as honest with her, but the way that I'm honest requires so much more finessing because, what could be just a pin needle to another, like I might have a pin needle to pick you, to convict you with something. Well, to her, it could come off as a sword because that is the manner in which she regards it. And so learning how to give feedback that is constructive feedback, that is also convicting feedback without it necessarily being like destructive or in a way that could come off hurtful because of her style of interpretation, that has been like something that I did not think was going to be what it is. And yeah, that's been like the
skill set in its own.
100%. Navigating your unique wife, because not every wife is maybe either as sensitive or as bold or as assertive, or all these different dimensions that can develop a person. But learning what your wife is, and then learning the dynamic and difference between godly wife and you interaction versus your interaction, even like with other women, your mother, brothers in the faith, or general people at large, like that singular relationship and those dynamics, totally outside of the realm. And the thing is, it's not a transferable thing that you can apply. Like, I found myself trying to have a conversation with like a buddy that I do debate with the similar techniques of what I use with my wife. And it was like, no, this is way too soft-handed. Like, I need to break out the pimp hand, and I need to like have a more firm thing that I'm saying, like it truly is 100% a unique interaction that you have to have there. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, no, like I think that's something I look forward to. It's just kind of like really like having that intimate relationship where you really like are knowing some person in and out and like how to talk to them and their nuances, because like people are so different. There's so many different things. So like like on one hand we're like 99.9% the same DNA or whatever like the figure is, but like there's so many different nuances to people. So.
Yeah, it's crazy how that 0.01 can make all this difference.
Yep.
Yeah, man. And I guess final one.
All right. So you have a microphone and you could deliver a message to the entire world right now. What would you say?
I would say repent, believe in Jesus as Lord and Savior, and follow him. And learn what it means to truly repent. Learn what it means to follow and the difference between following versus works. And learn what it means to have community rather than just having friends that you hang out with. Yeah.
All right. I like that.
Yeah, man. Those things right there. And the thing is, the demographic of the type of viewer, the young man that I go for through this podcast, I know will not receive that for about the next 15 years. Because if I was watching this podcast, I wouldn't receive it until about another 15 years later.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's definitely a spiritual journey, as we say. So.
Oh yeah, man.
But the earlier you get it, the easier it is. That's for sure.
100%. So. Which I think that's what's really cool about looking at you and your walk and where you've been with it. Like, I know several scores of people that I have friendship or brotherhood or anything like that with, and I can see these kind of through lines of their exposure at a certain age, how they have either faithfully walked along it or rebelliously walked along it, and where they are in life. And the consistent thing that I see is that the brothers who allowed themselves to either idolize the idea of having a girlfriend or their ability to elicit respect from, whether it's the Black community or just the world at large, or elicit like the desires of vast amounts of women. The brothers who have indulged in that are the brothers who are having the hardest time playing catch up right now. And then brothers like yourself who have been walking probably still in some amount of struggles yourself, but like had that consistency where you held on to it through college and after college. Like, I just see a difference of like those endpoints.
Yeah, because that's the thing. Yeah, we are humans are habitual creatures. So like, and like your brain, sort of just pure brain chemistry. Like it'll do what you tell it to do. Literally, like if you give it the same stimulus like thousands and thousands of times, it's gonna think that's what life is. But the same can be said true about anything. So you can easily just much change it. So like if you want to change your path and like go a different route or kind of like turn back a certain way, like all you got to do is you got to start. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Like, so once you start, commit to that, build consistent habits, build consistency, it just gets easier and easier. Like it's hard to start out for sure, but like once you get to like that level of consistency, then it's like, all right, now I'm at the point in my life where it's like, all right, something happens, it is what it is. God's got it. Like it's it's kind of like you get a kind of a peace over it. Like that's the biggest thing I found is like that's something I value more than anything now is my time and my peace. Those are biggies now. And like the only way I can really get there is just to really like, have a firm foundation spiritually and also just like stop sweating the small stuff. Cause like there are literally bigger things more important to do in life than just to like, be sad about this person or that person, that kind of thing. So,
yeah. And I guess that is one more question I have before we throw out the next segment of the show for you is you mentioned not being sad about this person or that person. There is this thing that people can have, like these attachments that we can have to, whether it's individuals or groups of people. And how have you come to allow yourself to, whether it's a friendship ending or there just being distance between you and a person or group of people, how have you allowed yourself not to dwell in that distance that is growing between you and those figures, and be at peace from that and continue forward in happy spirit?
Yeah, it's definitely not easy. I think that's one of the big journeys I've taken the last probably couple of years is that notion. Because I definitely am a person to become very attached to like people and things in particular, like good or bad. And I think maybe around like 2-3 years ago, I think one of the big things is just like really establishing standards of like, in a partner, I want this, in a friendship, I need this. Like having those standards of like, if they're going to be in my sphere in whatever capacity, they have to meet this criteria. And like, that's made it easier to where like, anyone after that point is really easy to like kind of root out those things before they become a problem, because before they become attachments, basically is kind of setting that baseline. So my struggles are still with things that happened before that. I definitely still have my struggles with that, but I think with those right now, way I'm going about it, it's just really just trying to be focused on like kind of the inner person, because like ultimately these people can't affect me unless I let them, and like if you do have like an unhealthy attachment towards something that's indirectly more internal, like there's something in terms of you that's why you're latching on to them. Like I think I've dived into like attachment theory. Like I'm a fearful avoidant, so like I find particularly like with like relationships or crushes, I tend to be very like, I grab onto them very tightly. But my friendships, I tend to like run away from them if I see them going awry, that kind of a thing, just because I've had issues with like not picking the best friends and them abandoning me and like doing me wrong, that kind of a thing. So like knowing that stuff and knowing my kind of the way I react to things attachment wise, I've tried to like counter that. Now I'm like, all right, even though this friend may have let me down, I need to give them the benefit of the doubt. Like I vetted them. I know they're good people. We're all human. They deserve a chance. Or like, I'm interested in a person, like, hey, we're just talking. Like, I don't need to worry about marrying her tomorrow. Like, it's just a conversation, like that kind of. So I try to like very much ground myself in being like, hey. And also think too, like for me with that too, like I really am trying to figure out kind of where God wants me in certain people's life. Because like it used to be where every female friend I had, inevitably I'd have a crush on them. Inevitably I'd be like, oh, is this my person? Like, but now I'm just like, I'm trying to bucket things. All right, cool. I'm like, this dynamic is kind of mentor-mentee. This kind of dynamic is, all right, they need a one guy friend that's not crushing on them. Like they need a good male perspective because they didn't have like their father in their life, that kind of thing. So I'm trying to find my purpose in people's lives that isn't based on my attachment or my feelings for them, So that's kind of been kind of try to navigate that myself.
Man, all right. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of self-awareness, a lot of reflection has gone into this process for you.
Yep, still going on.
Yeah.
So we're slow. I feel like we're getting a little bit better every day, and that's the goal. If you keep doing that, you'll get where you need to get. So
absolutely. And then so the next segment is, what are 3 pieces of wisdom from this conversation that you especially want to make sure that any listener takes with them going forward?
Definitely think the first thing about like the notion of good luck and just being prepared. Like you never know when your opportunity is going to come, but if you're prepared for it, then you can seize it. So like that's my old boss said. Good luck is the cross section of opportunity and preparation. So that's something I carry with me every single day. I need to make sure, like, like I never want to be a case where like, oh, my wife was there, I just wasn't ready for her, or like that job opportunity was there, but I wasn't ready to seize it. I didn't know what I needed to know at the time. So I never want to be in that case where like that happens to me. So that's kind of definitely something to live by. Another thing would be, I guess, don't be afraid of resistance. Don't be afraid of something being hard, because typically if something's hard, that means it's worth it. Like if you think about the reason something is valuable is either because it's rare or it's difficult to get or obtain, So like you need to let that be you. You need to let yourself be valuable, let yourself be rare, let yourself be a person that's gone through the fire, put the hard work in, done things that other people won't do. That way you can kind of like see yourself as a certain valuable aspect. Let's see, a third. Honestly, just simple, like be kind to yourself. Like in this world of hustle and bustle and all these stimulus and all this pressure, like you got to remember, like, you got to take care of yourself. You got to be kind to yourself. Know that at the end of the day, you're trying the best you can. We're all in this world, we're all here just temporarily, like to an extent, take it seriously because you want to live after this. But like, there's certain things you take seriously, but a lot of things are just like, it'll be gone tomorrow. A lot of people's opinions on you won't matter. A lot of things you go through, a lot of inconveniences today won't matter tomorrow. So like really, focus to make sure that you're good for yourself and you're kind to yourself. So.
Awesome. Thank you, my man. And as we get ready to fully close this thing out, what is something specific that we can, myself and any future viewers of this episode, can all come around in prayer in order to help you, encourage you, lift you up?
I'd say patience. Patience is a big thing. Like God has a plan, and the plan, it will always work out in your favor. You just have to be ready for it, and you just have to be patient.
All right. Love him, my man. So at this time, audience, please join me in prayer for Auree before we get ready to wrap up here. Dear Lord and Heavenly Father, we thank you, God, for this time where you've allowed for each of us to set these hours before us as two brothers, being able to come together, reconnect, talk about these pivotal pieces of our lives, from rest to work, relationships of all sorts, whether parental, relational, or friendship-wise. Dear God, we thank you that you have so much wisdom for us. You have truly a plan and a path laid out for us, God. And sometimes we, as your earthly creations, walking in this, we can begin to wonder and have more and more question marks pop up, God. But Lord, I just want to lift up Auree in this time as he is continuing to walk faithfully, as he's being diligent and persevering, running the good race, and continuing to trust in you, God. I want to pray that you would continue to fill his cup of patience. We know, God, that the fruit of the Spirit, one of them is patience. And so, as abundant as possible, may he be fully reflective and fully sufficient in every fruit of the Spirit possible, God. And may his patience be rewarded in due time, according to your plan, according to the whims that you have that would glorify your kingdom, God. I thank you for his willingness just to trust and abide, to reflect and understand that no matter how much something is hyped up or amplified or indulged in, God, we don't play a part in quickening it. It truly is according to your plan. And I thank you for his understanding that it has nothing to do with forcing something, but it has everything to do with having opportunity meet proper preparation. So, Lord, may he continue to prepare diligently, and may he be ever vigilant for every true opportunity that meets your standard to what should come into his life, what he should focus attention on, and where his next footstep should be. And so, Lord, we thank you, and we pray that Auree is blessed in the rest of this day. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right, everyone. Thank y'all, anybody that hopped on. And we did have a few people actually who hopped on this early. Thank y'all for joining. For everyone that watches this on the back end, thank you for tuning in. I have been your host, Devontae Colonel. Once again, this has been Auree Postel, and I will see you guys on the next episode of the Inspired Challenge podcast. Take care and see you later. And we are out. I have an end screen. Where is it at? Whatever. I'll see you guys. All right, my mans.
Right.
2 hours 15, 10:37.